Hi everyone, welcome. I was just looking at this illustration that I created. I've got this little kind of scratch pad board that I use sometimes to create diagrams and illustrations, and what I really did here today was I I took what I usually create as an illustration and I've been managing it as sort of a spreadsheet now to really simplify all the information in there, but it seems like we got to get up so close to see it, it's not really making a lot of sense this way, right? So what I did was I just copied it and I made it nice and big into the size that we could usually properly see on the camera, hopefully. And it's kind of a shame because the spreadsheet version's got all kinds of other details on all the specific dates of when all the feedings occurred, and you know, we've actually got little tiny numbers here showing the age of each of these feedings at this point, which is kind of cool. But that actually shows the interval in between each feedings, and the spreadsheet's able to calculate all this stuff instantly. So all I needed to do really was pop open the document, get this little board out, and then I wrote it down here. It took 4 minutes for me to transcribe what's on there onto here. And I guess what's on there too is that I scratched out those things of which we've seen no signs of recently, which I forgot to do here. But we're going to get into this bin because it's due for its next feeding. We've been getting into this 10-day pattern so that it's really easy, so that when we feed down here, we know that if we start going counterclockwise back, since we're doing the 12th feeding today, the 11th feeding over here 10 days ago of cantaloupes can be checked on, see how it's coming along. Going back to 20 days now, we had some potato peels. Going back to 30 days ago, some stems of cabbage, and so on and so forth. Going back quite a way, all the way to the beginning. In some cases, stuff that's coming up on 100 days old, we'll probably still see some leftovers of, obviously, the pumpkin stem. So I'm going to get a glove on. We're going to get that bit up here on the bench and check out how it's coming along. I haven't decided what to give it yet either, so we'll have to hit the fridge upstairs to bring down something to give them, but I thought we'd just get started, open up the space for the food, and then resume filming once we've got something to give them. So let's get to work. Here and there you can see a couple of these little flying insects in here. I've already kind of almost gotten to the point where I've tuned out insects in my worm bins for some reason. Last year I felt like I was actually suffering from being so obsessed with always dwelling on how to deal with the insects in my systems. It was specifically the mites that were driving me bananas. I can see a couple worms over here latched onto one another, preparing to make a couple cocoons. I don't want to, upturn what they're doing over there. That's the mating process. But, we'll eventually get in there because we do usually inspect every corner. And as you saw in the diagram, the last feeding of cantaloupe melon rind is over here, indicated with this coffee filter. So that means going in a clockwise direction, we're coming into this corner here. And since we started here, when you get back to here for a second return visit, now you've actually started into a second lap. So here we've gone around once, twice, and this is actually the completion of a third lap, right? So each lap consists of 4 visits to 4 separate corners. Since this is the 12th feeding, this is the completion of lap number 3. So when we're done here, I think I've got I've got a whole bunch of coffee actually. Geez, should we use coffee as the feeding today? Seems kind of lame, but it would kind of be a smart idea, I believe, because while it's interesting to put something in here that is going to take a long time in the early days, knowing that there's plenty of time for that to break down, you could track its progress. Now that we're past 100 days, I usually start to shy away from stuff that's going to take a long time. So coffee might not be a bad idea. Now, let's just preface this little excavation that we're doing down here with the fact that this is where we're going to be feeding. And I didn't actually want to upturn this corner yet. We'll get back to this and we'll ready this for the application of food once we get back in here. But since the most recently added food in here is 40 days old chestnut, of which we saw very little remains, it makes me kind of question what it is that the worms are so excited about being here for. Because as soon as you turn back the top surface, there's all these worms hanging out, but that corner's not been fed in 40 days, and I'm pretty sure that it's been depleted of food. But let's get back to that corner when we've completed a quick inspection of the other corners. The last place we fed here with the cantaloupe rinds, To me, it looks like a lot of nice fresh castings covering the surface here. I mean, all the past feeding areas have castings on top, but here somehow it seems like perhaps a little bit more. And you know, after 10 days, I would think that there's probably a good amount of leftover cantaloupe in here. At least rinds, right? Maybe they'll nibble off all the nice, soft, juicy bits and leave behind just the tougher outer skin of the melon. That's what it looks like we're seeing here, right? It's almost see-through at this point. Very little signs of that orange-colored melon. Here, we see a little bit. Not too much, though. There was a pretty good amount of it stuck in here, so I don't think I've got all of it out yet. Here we go. A couple larger pieces, even. I think what's mixed in here is coffee, because this stuff just has something about it, a different look, darker, different grain, structure, shape, I don't know, something about the light bouncing off of it. It's something different, noticeably different. So to me it does look like they've done a number on this feeding after only 10 days. Here's one piece that feels, I can feel the thickness of it here, you know, and it doesn't flop around like a sheet of paper. There is one little chunk here, perhaps the size of like a silver dollar, a little bit bigger. Still see they're working the fruity part of it down, but everywhere else it seems like all the other pieces have been stripped clean of all the melon, leaving behind only the little floppy rind. This is a coffee filter, I believe, piece of paper. Bedding, so, you know, we usually take a quick peek, but we don't want to go crazy disrupting it, and we definitely want to put it right back where we found it so we can enjoy another quick visit on it in the future, probably 10 days from now, to see how it looks after it's been in the worm bin for 20 days. But the other thing that was mixed in here was, from the previous feeding going back even further, was yet another application of melon rind 50 days ago too. So we may have even bumped into a couple of the really old pieces that have been in there for 50 days already. But I think what we saw was mainly leftovers of the last feeding. So here, last feeding that was placed into here was potato peels, which went in here after first being frozen. And usually when you've got potato peels that have been frozen and thaw, the worms polish that stuff off fast. This is a little tiny slither, little fragment that I broke off with my finger of the pumpkin stem that I mentioned earlier. This is the corner where that is. That's kind of cool. There's a, right on top of the pumpkin stem, there's a relatively new cocoon that's been placed on here. The new is just indicated by its color, that light greenish color, almost like a little tiny, I don't even know what to equate it to. Something so weird about seeing worms so interested in just a chunk of decomposing wood or whatever it's made of. So, you know, last time I demonstrated how this stuff's pretty fragile and I chipped off a piece of it. I'm not going to make a habit of that. I'd rather see how the worms break it down, not how I'm able to chip it away with my finger. So if we find some, you know, potato peels in here, that would kind of make sense, because that stuff usually breaks down a little more slowly as well. But I don't know, something about potatoes. I was a little surprised at how quickly potatoes go sometimes and how much the worms appear to like them. I guess what's mixed in here is some of the bedding we included with the most recent feeding. You know, I'm debating on whether I want to add bedding. Usually systems past 100 days of age, which this is now, I try to limit the bedding that I put in. Oh, I just saw a piece of potato peel. Nibbled clean of all the yummy parts, and that'll go too in time. It's just a little tougher material. Now the weird thing, oh geez, look at me, I'm such an airhead. I would totally I'll totally benefit from having like an executive director or someone keep an eye on me, make sure I don't miss important steps. It's just me here with my camera on a tripod, so I'm not getting any coaching or help. Every now and then it feels like it would be good to get a little psst, hey, forgot something. All right, sorry, let's move on. We're now back to the last corner we're going to check on before applying today's feeding. But actually it's going to be more about after taking a break to get some more food so we can apply the feeding. So now what went into here was the stem of a regular large greenish white cabbage. Then there was a smaller Savoy cabbage. Just those stems, you know, and I think the Savoy cabbage stem was gone like after the first, you know, interval between feedings when we came back in here and saw no sign of it. I think we saw a chunk of the leftover of the larger stem, but that was so far gone I really had serious doubts about ever bumping into that again. And if we see it, we'll see it. I wouldn't be too surprised if there's maybe a little tiny chunk of it, but if there is, it ain't going to be much, that's for sure. So the real thing that's interesting here is going back, 2 feedings, where 70 days ago we put avocados in here, avocados that had been cut in half and left wide open for the worms to cruise into and eat. And there's the shell and all the insides of it. And I've got, the 2 halves of one and the 2 halves of another in here, so there's actually 2. I guess it looks like we've been kind of breaking it. They're getting fragile, hard to handle. So every time I excavate and check them out and look at them, they're kind of breaking a bit. And this is just driving me bananas, I gotta tell you. It makes me feel like I want to just somehow blend it together with some bedding or something and crumble it all, make it into little bits and fragments, and then will it even go then, or is it just going to make a bigger mess, making it tougher to clean up later? It seems like it's got to go. It's all organic material. It's got to decompose. There's got to be some sort of bacteria that's going to like nibble away at that, or mold or something. Maybe I've just got to expose it to the elements. Maybe it's protecting itself by being in a big clump. I might just turn the camera off and flip a coin and come back at you with some sort of a decision on that here. I do feel like I gotta pull the trigger on something, do something about that, right? So let's do just that. I'm getting very close to running out of my pre-made bedding, but I don't think we need much. I just feel like I want something that I could smear this this material up against and into or something, just so it's kind of spread out and no longer clumped up. I don't know if I'm doing this in the best way, and if I actually had 2 hands, we could maybe get this done much more efficiently, but I don't know. I'm trying to handle a camera without making a mess of it, so I sacrificed the extra dexterity of 2 hands for keeping things tidy. And I think that's okay. I've actually become quite, I feel like I've become quite skilled doing all this stuff with just 1 hand, because it's pretty much the only way I ever do it. This stuff's actually all fragmenting up pretty nicely, and all the shells are all breaking. They're all super soft. And it does feel like a good idea to break them. Maybe I'll leave a couple larger pieces, but in the end, as interesting it is to check out the progress of stuff over time, it is ultimately the idea to see it all break down, so to have opportunities to help that process along, and to not take those opportunities seems like a shame. This is such a weird combination of stuff here, but now you got a lot of the kind of foods that these night crawlers like blended up against the food too. They're pretty into the carbon and the bedding and stuff like that, so maybe this is exactly the trick to get them interested. Well, I don't know, we can only hope, right? See where it goes. So this is really the corner where we're going to be coming back into next time. It's time to feed, and then we'll get to see what the outcome of this little experiment was. So I don't know if this is something that might work or not, but it seems like a sensible idea, and we'll find out if it did or didn't work next time we're in here. So we usually don't take that much time when we're in one of these corners, but I was really getting that weird feeling like something's going awry in here, and it wouldn't hurt to try to help things along a little bit. And I kind of just been brainstorming that approach for a while now, that might just be a possible way to help things here, so we'll see. Kind of an improvised band-aid for what appears to need a little bit of help, so let's keep our fingers crossed for this. So on to the feeding, right? So here, if you look, the diagram represents 2 things that have already been scratched off, right? Apple peels going back 80 days, chestnuts going back 40 days. Last time we were in here, I don't remember seeing any bits of that, so I scratched it. So in theory, we're going into a corner where, there's really no leftover foods that we were able to clearly find. Although when you start squishing through stuff, you got to kind of assume that, well, a lot of that's probably just leftover mush of the food they're eating. And that's the reason there's all the interest and why all the worms are hanging out in it. Well, that's why all the moisture is still there. So it seems realistic to think that there are obviously leftovers of chestnut in here, kind of in creamy, smeary form, that perhaps the worms haven't eaten all yet. But I don't know, all these worms cruising this material, and that limited amount of food that it was, it almost seems like it's probably been eaten at this point. I don't know. I'm not sure. It's interesting. All right, so this must be that point in time when we take a little break because I've got nothing to put in here other than maybe the last of this little itsy bitsy bit of bedding. I was even thinking maybe we just compost our diagram. For a while there I was wrapping food in paper bits, and maybe we can do that here. Maybe we can include this sheet of paper with our next feeding. I gotta go upstairs, see what I got, and then we'll pick up where we left off, give them some food, perhaps give them the last dose of any sort of bedding that's this size, and then we can pick up where we left off, right? So let's get to that. Well, I went up to the kitchen and I saw two of these, and I just couldn't resist bringing one of them down. It's just coffee, but I've already got another one of these sitting up there. It's also got to get composted, and in addition to that, a couple banana peels, nothing too fancy. I'm sure we'll probably see leftovers of the coffee for a while. These might take a little bit to break down. And you know what we'll do is we'll even, at this point, use that nice brand new coffee filter as our ongoing feeding zone indicator. This one that's been floating around in the bin over here for a while now, that one will get the honor of being part of today's feeding. Let's see here. I've got very little, but I just sort of like this stuff as the foundation to drop foods onto. Because hopefully, you know, probably not much, but you know, maybe a little bit of juices will come out of those thawing banana peels. Actually, probably not enough to make any difference to the moisture level of a handful of shredded paper combined with some leaves, combined with this and that, but it looks like it's time for me to make some more of my pre-made bedding. So let's see, I've got a variety of stuff here, right? Because we talked about bringing this over. So why don't we start creating little bits of layers of this and that. We got one yummy piece of food here. I don't know, we should put, yeah, let's grab my grit. My grit is pulverized eggshells. Somewhat imperfect, this batch. There's some pretty good sized chunks in there. Look at that big one there. And I'm not worrying about it. I'm just letting it go. Hey, big pieces of shell end up out in my garden or something, or next to a plant, you know, all that. I think that calcium still keeps leaching out of, is it calcium or some sort of minerals come out of the material to feed the plants. Let's throw some more of this before we put the next banana peel in here too. Try to combine these things. Another layer of paper, hopefully putting it right in the line of fire where a lot of worm traffic is going to do a number on it. And even more coffee, more banana peel, oh, more diagram. I don't think people are that fond of the spreadsheet. I didn't get a lot of interest in that. I think people prefer the hand-drawn version, but the spreadsheet definitely helps with running up the numbers that we're interested in seeing all the time. You know, very easy to spit out exactly how old something is, how long it's been in here getting worked on. And then it's also a function of, you know, what it is that's actually doing the work on the food, you know. And there does seem to be a pretty decent number of worms occupying the system, keeping themselves busy, working all the foods down. Yeah, you know, after 3 laps around here and 12 feedings, I'm very curious to see what we're going to end up seeing over at that avocado feeding area, because it's just been, do we have everything before we cover up? I think so. Okay, right. So the feeding, the bedding, the grit, try to blend in the coffee if possible. So coffee's not going to be something we're going to see many leftovers of in future feedings, perhaps 1 or 2 times, but it's really the banana peels that we're going to get a chance to observe the breakdown process of. Should be interesting to see. I mean, I wasn't even looking for it, but this would have been where we had placed chestnut. Perhaps there are still maybe little tiny fragments of chestnut floating around. I didn't really go looking for them, but it seems unlikely. And then You know, going back even further, apple peels. If we saw an apple peel floating around here, which is possible, who knows? You know, we'd have to keep in mind that that's going, you know, quite a way back, 80 days. But it's, who knows, might still be possible. But, you know, as we get closer and closer to some point in time where we decide it's going to be the last feeding, and start deciding it's time to start steering this thing towards harvest, getting the worms busy on some other setup, we'll start to, you know, give them foods that are going to break down a lot more quickly, not so many leftovers to be checked in on in the future. Probably less bedding too, you know. It's one of the things I usually try to do as I approach the end, is try to limit the amount of stuff that's going to end up looking like litter throughout the system, little fragments of paper shreds and whatnot. So that to me always seems like the tug of war in my brain, is that, you know, it goes against what I've been trying to do so lately, is be super generous on bedding, and then when I have to throttle back, or I feel like I have to throttle back to try to meet the objective of some nice, clean, debris-free castings, you know, I have to withhold the bedding that the worms seem to need so much. So still trying to figure out the right balance point between those things. So that's always fun. I always enjoy checking in on this system. It's always interesting to see what's going on, and I got to admit, it was a little bit of a relief to be able to just look at that spreadsheet and, you know, whip up that diagram in 4 minutes, because I like the diagram, and I like all the information, you know. But seeing it on the screen or on that printout, it's kind of lame. So maybe it is worth taking the extra 4 minutes every day to, not every day, every 10 days, right? What the heck? To prepare it as a visual aid for feeding this system. So that's pretty much it. I got a couple things I've got to clean up and put away, but I'm not going to waste your time with that. Before I go, let me just really quickly say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. There's also channel memberships. Just hit the join button and, you know, kick in a couple bucks. What the heck, if you want to support the channel. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.